Nashville, Tennessee, March 29th, 1972, 2:15 in the afternoon. RCA Studio B on 17th Avenue is quiet between sessions. The kind of quiet that recording studios hold differently from other places, a thick, padded silence designed to swallow outside noise, to create a sealed world where only what happens inside the room matters. The walls are covered in acoustic foam, the floors are carpeted. The overhead lights are dimmed to a low amber warmth that makes the space feel smaller than it is, more intimate, more confessional. Elvis Presley is sitting alone in the recording booth. He has been sitting there for 11 minutes, without asking for anything. The engineer in the control room has checked twice through the glass to make sure he is all right. Both times Elvis waved him off not rudely, just with the particular wave of a man who needs a few more minutes inside his own head before he can be anywhere else. He is 37 years old. He is the most famous entertainer on earth. He has sold more records than almost anyone alive. He has filled stadiums on 4 continents. He has a daughter he loves with everything he has, a home that is famous enough to have its own address on tourist maps, and a career that shows no sign of stopping. And 7 days ago, the woman he married sat across from him at Graceland and told him she was leaving. Not angrily. That would almost have been easier. Priscilla had done it quietly, with the particular composure of someone who has been preparing for a difficult conversation for a very long time and has finally decided the preparation is finished. She told him she loved him. She told him she would always love him. She told him that loving someone and being able to live with them are sometimes 2 different things, and that she had finally understood the difference. Elvis had not argued. He had not raised his voice. The people who were at Graceland that day say he simply went very still the way he went still sometimes, when something was happening that he didn't have a performance for. When the situation called for a response that no amount of charisma or stage presence could provide, he sat very still, and he listened, and when Priscilla finished, he said, "I know." 2 words. And in those 2 words, everyone who knew him heard everything the years of knowing something was wrong, the years of not being able to fix it, the years of being too much and too little simultaneously, too famous to be present and too present to ever fully leave. I know. Priscilla left Graceland that afternoon. She drove back to Los Angeles. And Elvis went to the music room and sat at the piano for 3 hours without playing a single note. 7 days later, he was in Nashville. He had asked his team to find him something to record. Not a soundtrack song, not something for a movie, not something the Colonel had approved and scheduled, something real, something that said what needed to be said. His producer, Felton Jarvis, had gone through dozens of songs and landed on a ballad written by Johnny Christopher, Mark James, and Wayne Carson that had been sitting in the RCA catalog without finding the right voice. When Elvis heard the demo of Always on My Mind, he listened to it once. Then he called Felton and said, "That's the one. Book the studio." The musicians who were called for the session that March afternoon described Elvis as different from how he usually arrived. Not bad, different, not difficult or withdrawn. Just quieter. He came in without his usual entourage, without the Memphis Mafia surrounding him, without the buffer of people that normally accompanied him everywhere. Just Elvis and the musicians and the song. He didn't talk much during setup. He stood near the back of the studio, looking at the lyric sheet, while the band found their positions and the engineer checked levels. The musicians glanced at each other. They had worked with Elvis before they knew his rhythms, his warm-up habits, the particular way he inhabited a room when he was in full performance mode. This wasn't that. This was something more careful, more interior. When the first run-through began, something in the room changed almost immediately. Elvis's voice on Always on My Mind that afternoon had a quality that session musicians and producers would spend decades trying to describe accurately. The technical term is vulnerability, but that word is used so often about performances that it has lost its precision. What they actually mean when they say it about Elvis that day is something more specific. They mean that the distance between the man and the microphone disappeared. They mean that the voice coming out of the speakers in the control room was not Elvis the performer, not Elvis the product, not the carefully maintained presentation of a legend who has been managing his own image since he was 20 years old. It was just a man singing about the things he should have said, the things he should have done, the time he should have given that he gave to everything else instead. Maybe I didn't love you quite as often as I could have. The pianist told an interviewer years later that he had to stop looking through the glass at Elvis during that first take, not because anything dramatic was happening. Elvis wasn't visibly crying, wasn't breaking down, wasn't stopping. He was standing at the microphone in the dim light, singing the song with his eyes half closed. But the pianist said, "I felt like I was watching something private, like the song wasn't for us, like we just happened to be in the room." The session producer, Felton Jarvis, was in the control room during the recording. He described the moment the first take ended this way. When the last note finished, nobody spoke. Not the engineer, not the assistant, nobody. We just sat there for a few seconds. And then I looked at the meters and realized I'd stopped taking notes about 5 minutes into the take. I'd just been listening. Felton pressed the intercom and asked Elvis if he wanted to hear the playback. Elvis said, "Was it right?" Felton said, "It was right." Elvis said, "Then we don't need to hear it." He did the song 2 more times that afternoon. The version that would become one of the most recognized recordings in American music history was the second take. Not because the first was flawed by every technical measure. The first take was nearly perfect. But Elvis had felt something in the second run-through that he wanted to preserve. A moment around the bridge of the song where his voice did something he hadn't planned. Something that came from the particular combination of the lyric and the melody and where he was that afternoon in his life. The specific moment is in the line, "Little things I should have said and done. I just never took the time." On the second take, Elvis's voice on that line has a quality that producers and musicians have studied for years. It doesn't crack, it doesn't break, but it gives slightly at the edges the way something gives when it is being held together carefully, and the effort of holding it is just barely visible. It is the sound of someone singing a truth they have been carrying for a long time and are only now putting into words. Felton called it on the intercom. "That's the one." Elvis stood at the microphone for a moment after the take ended. Then he said, quietly, "Yeah." He took the lyric sheet off the music stand. He folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. Nobody mentioned this. At the time, musicians in recording sessions understand intuitively what belongs to the artist and what belongs to the work. But people who were there remembered it later. Once the song became what it became, he took the lyric sheet. He kept it. After the session, Elvis didn't go back to the hotel where the rest of his team was staying. He drove alone, which he almost never did, almost never was allowed to do, to a park near the studio. He sat in the car for about 40 minutes. Then he called Graceland. The person who answered was not Priscilla. She was already in Los Angeles. Already beginning the process of building the life she would have without him. The person who answered was a member of the Memphis Mafia, who took the call and later described it this way. He just wanted to talk for a few minutes. He didn't say anything in particular. He asked about Graceland, about how things were at the house. Then he said goodnight and hung up. The call lasted 9 minutes. Always on My Mind was released as a single in April of 1972. It reached number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100, not his biggest chart success, not the number 1 he had achieved dozens of times before. But something about the song moved differently from his other recordings of that period. Radio stations played it more than the chart position warranted. Letters came in from listeners who heard something in it that hit them in a place they hadn't expected. The song had a life that charts couldn't measure. Elvis performed Always on My Mind, Live many times. In the years that followed, every version is recognizable as his. Every version carries the marks of his voice and his phrasing. But musicians and fans who have compared the recordings consistently say the same thing. The studio version, from March 1972, has something the live versions don't. Something that can't be recreated in front of an audience. Something that only exists when a man is standing in a small room in Nashville, 1 week after the most important thing in his personal life has changed forever, singing a song about all the ways he fell short, with no audience to perform for, and no one watching, except the musicians, who had the grace to understand they were witnessing something that wasn't for them. Elvis and Priscilla's divorce was finalized in October of 1973. They remained in each other's lives for Lisa Marie, and for whatever it was they had that outlasted the marriage. Neither of them ever fully explained it. The people who knew them both say there isn't a word for it. What there is a recording. 2 minutes and 49 seconds of a man at a microphone in Nashville, singing about the particular grief of almost, of should have, of took for granted and ran out of time. It is the most honest thing Elvis Presley ever put on tape. Not because he was trying to be honest. He wasn't performing honesty, wasn't calculating the emotional impact, wasn't thinking about how it would be received. He was just standing there in the dim light of Studio B with a folded lyric sheet in his jacket pocket, doing what he had always done when he didn't have words for something. He sang. And sometimes, when everything else falls away, when the jumpsuits and the stadiums and the legend have been folded and put somewhere quiet, what you are left with is a voice in a room telling the truth. That afternoon in Nashville, Elvis told the truth, and we have been listening ever since. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something you should have said, someone you took for granted, time you wish you'd spent differently, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below. What does Always on My Mind mean to you? And have you ever found a song that said something you couldn't say yourself? The notification bell is right there. Ring it, because the songs that last are always the ones that cost something to make.